Hello and welcome to the Maritime Forecast. This is a new podcast series brought to you by Develop Consulting in conjunction with our good friends at the Society of Maritime Industries. Now, this is where you really get to listen and explore trends, challenges and opportunities that are really shaping the future of the maritime industry in the UK. Now, each episode will bring together industry leaders and experts to discuss the real topics that are facing the sector and that are interesting to you. Everything from government policy, international competition, operational excellence, skills, you name it, we will talk about it. Now, my name is Darren Jones. I am the Maritime Director at Develop Consulting. Develop Consulting work in multiple sectors, everything from rail, automotive, aerospace, you name it, but also maritime. Really looking at helping companies get to that operational excellence, specialising in that low volume, high value manufacturing and maintenance sector. Today, we're discussing something that's really critical and massively topical for the future of UK shipping. With recent world events, we're recording this in March 2026. If you're looking at it later, there have been some very serious recent events. We really want to know, what does this mean for the maritime sector in the UK, particularly as the shipbuilding, that defence side really does underpin a lot of what happens in the UK. To discuss this, I've got two real experts that really know a lot more than me. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Tom Chant MBE. He's the CEO of the Society of Maritime Industries. They represent over 400 maritime companies in the UK and really are the voice of the industry. And if you're not a member of them, you really should be. Hello to you, Tom.
And good afternoon. Hello.
And I've got another CEO. I've got the CEO of Develop Consulting, Steve Boam. Now, he brings decades of experience across all different sectors, so can really bring this perspective of what can the maritime industry learn from other sectors that have been through similar things. So I'm going to get straight to the heart of it with you, Tom. Clearly, it's March 2026, so things have kicked off, frankly, around Iran. We've seen issues with deploying a British ship to Cyprus. Have we got enough grey ships and mass in the water? And what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to have a sustainable UK sovereign capability? If you could just tell us, what do you think the current changes and the current challenges, what's that outlook for the British maritime industry and how it can support that?
Yeah, it's obviously a very timely reminder that maritime security does provide the bedrock of our sort of sovereign capabilities, you know, with our trade, our energy, our data, you know, and you know, our security around our shores is all totally dependent on the maritime sector. So you know, the fast turnaround they've put together for HMS Dragon to get out to Cyprus, you know, that's an example of how the Navy has been, you know, thinned over the past few years, but also leans in perhaps towards the future of the Navy. There's all the talk in defence world and the maritime space is around the hybrid Navy now, and the existence of the, you know, they call these exquisite items like the Type BAE's Type 26s in Glasgow and the Type 31s coming out of Babcock in Rosyth. Those being supported by essentially like a flotilla of uncrewed surface vessels or autonomous underwater vessels, all out operating across, you know, beyond the horizon to give that extended range and capability. So, and it's that bit that the industry is waiting for at the moment to sort of determine how the industry is going to help deliver and support the Navy in this. So last year we had a strategic defence review, which led to a defence industrial strategy. And now everybody's waiting for the defence investment plan, which is about really where the money's spent. There are a number of projects that are all sort of hanging on this, and people are exceedingly keen to see the dip, as it's called, published, so they know the exact sort of direction of travel. Because the cost of these the Type 26s, the Type 31s. You cannot get enough sort of mass out on the water with these things. It's just too expensive, and the amount of sailors they require is too much. Whereas the hybrid navy with a fleet of autonomous vessels roaming around the Atlantic, monitoring Russian activity, is the future. And if some of that capability and difficulty was, in the Mediterranean, perhaps HMS Dragon wouldn't need to be there. There could be a mobile remote operations control unit onshore, maybe the RAF base, monitoring and monitoring drone activity, for example, coming in. So it's that kind of smaller, hybrid, remotely operated world that the Navy is moving to, backed up by the exquisite items that are being manufactured in Scotland at the moment. So.
And Tom, you used the word waiting quite a lot in that. We've had a review after a strategy, and then we're waiting. While we're waiting for these big orders that underpin our industry, we're losing skills, we're losing companies, we're losing supply chain.
Yep.
How do you see us rapidly ramping that back up and maintaining it for the longer term?
Whenever there is a gap in manufacturing and orders and that pipeline that the industry needs, particularly in the shipbuilding side, there is, you lose people, you lose jobs, you're going to go to other industries. If you look around the UK, there's the work that's going on with the grid expansion, the nuclear projects, HS2. All these are pulling in the welders, the fabricators, the pipe fitters, all the people that the shipbuilding industry needs to work. So, you're going to go and work on a nice, solid, long-term project, like a nuclear build, or you're going to wait for your order to come around in shipbuilding because of the defence world. So it's you get down to that sort of nitty-gritty about where people are going for jobs. You cannot just wait for these opportunities to come along. And that's why the industry. The industry is having to. Some of the defence companies are actually laying people off at the moment, which is quite an incredible thing to hear. So
yeah. Steve Boam, welcome. And you've done quite a lot of work in other industries, and one I'm thinking of in particular is the rail industry. And manufacturing and maintenance in rail, and that's a little bit like shipbuilding. It's lumpy, isn't it? They have big contracts and then they haven't got contracts. How has the rail industry managed to maintain skills and actually become centres of world excellence, not just carrying on the same way they always have?
Yeah, so there's massive parallels, Darren, with shipbuilding or vessels, refurbs, as well as new. So the rail industry over the last 15 years has seen seismic change, really. So 15 years ago, some big orders placed with the government to renew fleets across the UK, including Scotland. And then more recently, those fleets have been delivered and have now gone into everyday operation and maintenance. But there's no orders. So we're seeing the likes of Bombardier, now Alstom in Derby, used to employ 1,500 people, now employing circa 300 people just to keep the site alive. And I'm not doing new builds, but doing refurbs, which traditionally would be done out in the depots and across the network rather than in the main site. Similar with Hitachi and others in the UK that build trains and maintain trains. So yeah, very cyclical, and we're seeing a real downturn at the minute, which has a knock-on effect to not just the factory, but obviously the supply chain, and as Tom just said then, the skills, the skills and the labour go to different industries or different parts of the UK and are no longer available if orders are placed and needed in the future.
Wow. Okay. So well, it's all about the government orders then. That's a huge critical piece. With them underpinning our shipbuilding industry, Tom, when they're looking at orders, clearly the price is a key thing. But should we be looking collectively with the government at should it be focused on the technologies, or should it be on securing that sovereign supply chain? So should the balloon ever go up, we can actually build and maintain vessels. Where should the focus be, do you think?
Well, if you look at almost any other country that does this, Darren, they look at the sovereign capability first as they need that capacity to support their commercial ambitions, shipbuilding ambitions, but also the defence side. That's the basic sort of security piece. So, the original shipbuilding strategy, John Parker was based in 2017, was around the looking at giving better sight lines and visibility to the defence world. The refresh of that in 2019 really looked at the need for, there's not enough naval shipbuilding in the UK to really support the supply chain. So they really needed to, at that point, they realised they needed to bring in the civil shipbuilding capabilities within that, and also the supply chain with it. So, and this is exactly what the rest of the world does. They would, if you're looking at a non-naval vessel being built in the UK, that vessel will be tendered overseas as well as for UK yards. Whereas in even over the channel in the EU, they wouldn't do that. They would build that work essentially because it gives that drumbeat of work, gives the opportunity for investment in the local supply chain, the yard itself, and keeps those jobs and that whole circle running basically. And then the output of that is a sovereign capability that's there. It's up to speed. You've got workers at the right time, and you've got a capacity. So, you look at, HMS Dragon. We talked about going out to Cyprus. That might have needed, work on its generators, doing its turbines or whatever. You need those skilled workers at the right time to deliver that work. And if you've got to fly those people in from, Germany or other allies, that's a stoppage in the order, and you can't get your own vessel out in time. So that's the kind of sovereign capability example we need. We need that drumbeat of civil shipbuilding pipeline that the government has within its grasp to help deliver the UK's maritime capabilities. And the last bit there is if the UK yards in a sort of short to medium term would likely be more expensive, not always, but slightly more expensive than other overseas yards. That's a number of factors. One, the overseas yards will have their own government support. They'll have cheaper finance options and guarantees that they'll lean into, and they'll have had a number of years of this as well. So they'll have the opportunity to invest in that, upskill the productivity delivery. So which is what you guys, of course, sort of lean into as well. So those are sort of elements that we keep. This is why we keep pushing so hard. And there's a lovely there's a lovely RUSI study around the benefits of that spend, and you get about a third of your money back so that a UK yard could be a third more expensive than an overseas yard, but still deliver because you get all the taxes back from the sort of the internal workings there.
Yeah. And Steve, if you look at other industries you work in, I know you work for hypercar manufacturers, all this kind of thing. Has there been a sort of sovereign capability there? As in, are you seeing supply chains reshoring back to the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a huge offshoring piece, as Tom was explaining, mainly because we were uncompetitive at one point in automotive, in rail, in other sectors around labour costs. So material costs, energy costs have all sort of normalised over the last 15, 20 years. But labour cost still remains high here in the UK and other parts of Europe, Germany, for example. So there was a huge offshoring piece where people went out to Eastern European countries and suppliers, or further afield, China and Asia. We've seen in certain sectors an onshoring piece where the total cost is not necessarily cheaper, because when you look at the quality of components that come back to the UK that may need to be reworked, and the length of the supply chain with things on boats and vessels being shipped from Asia, for example, and the problems we're seeing with that now, and then having to air freight emergency parts or rework parts due to quality later, the total cost outweighs the differential in the labour cost. So there's now a piece of work that automotive have been doing for like the last 5 years to onshore back to the UK or back to the UK and Europe.
Okay, I mean that's fascinating, and the other angle on this is export, isn't it? Yes, we need government contracts, and yes, that will underpin. But if we were exporting vessels as well and parts, that actually gives a more sustainable industry. Now we've seen just in recent weeks I think the biggest ever order of the Norwegians buying some vessels from us. Is the UK now positioned to be a really good exporter in the maritime market? What do you think, Tom?
Well, I think, yes, you just highlighted that rather successful sale by BAE Systems there, and that is a result of some really joined up government support as well. So we've really got to praise the Department of Business and Trade, and the MOD, all that sort of the elements are all pulled together, and actually, they brought in ministers, prime ministers, etc., to support that deal. And in the defence world, as opposed to the civil world, that is the way that government to government sales work. The French are particularly good at this, and the UK is getting better, and that the Norway deals has proved that. So, and that Norway deals on top of Canada and Australia as well. And then if you look, just to the east of them on Rosyth, Babcock have been very successful with the sales to Indonesia and Poland as well. So there's good opportunities there, but they're certainly working on further opportunities there as well. So so that's the naval side of it. For the UK to sell ships abroad, we've got to get to a position of better finance packages and guarantees available in the UK. That is something that the UK only needs to be competitive with. It needs to be on a the quality of the vessels is great, the design's wonderful, the supply chain's all there, but the finance bit is the key to getting any export work. And actually, on the supply chain, the very sort of genesis or the reason SMI exists is when post-war, post-1945, when shipbuilding started to leave the UK over to first Japan and then Korea and China. In 1966, a group of supply chain companies got together, and so we used to do a lot of work in the UK, and it's all gone abroad now. We need a body to help us get abroad and do missions and exhibitions and things, and that was the reason it was called the BMEC, the British Marine Equipment Council, was set up in 1966, and name changed to SMI in 2001. But that was the reason to support that supply chain. And we still have if you're at Asia Pacific Maritime in a couple of weeks' time, or a Posidonia in June, and SMM, you'll see the amount of UK companies at this event. They are all innovating. They're that faster, better, cheaper bit. So we're not making huge amounts of commercial ships in the UK, but we're still do a great job in the overseas the supply chain, the sales there, and so very, very pleased with the work we do to support that part of the sector still.
Steve, I quite often get asked to go and do public speaking, particularly on export, and I talk about, and I get asked, if you're going to export, what's the key lessons you need to learn? And everybody thinks it's about sales, but I often think it's about the operations, because as soon as you're exporting, it's like being in the football league and then suddenly playing international football. You've got to step up. You've got to be the best. Otherwise, you can't compete. So I think if we can come back to your experience again in rail and also in supercars, hypercars, or whatever, those high value, low volume manufacturers from the UK do export. and do really well. What is it that we do? And is it just because they have to focus on getting the process right and operational excellence? Because otherwise they wouldn't be able to competitively compete on cost.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of dimensions here, just following on from what Tom said and then leading into your question. So I think the UK still is and has always been a great engineering centre. We are great at innovation. We are great at designing and making products, vessels in the marine industry, whether that be naval or commercial, as Tom has said. We're great at making and designing hypercars, aeroplanes, bits for aeroplanes, and all the way through the subsectors and the supply chain. There's a huge opportunity within maritime in the UK because of some of the government direction in terms of net zero and carbon reduction to innovate, like the automotive industry has had to do and has been forced to do over the last 10 to 20 years. We need to make ships more economical. We need to decarbonise. Well, that requires engineers and that requires designers and that requires a supply chain that can respond. We need to make ships, as Tom said at the start, not the huge vessels that sit on the top of the water, but diversifying. If you look at the defence sector with aerospace, drone production is literally, gone tenfold and more in the last 5 years, predominantly through the Russia invasion of Ukraine, but then more recently, as we're seeing this month in Iran. So the model is changing. Therefore, the requirement to manufacture and what to design before you manufacture is changing, and the supply chain to facilitate that is changing. So the UK has a massive opportunity to respond to that and deliver. Now, in terms of the second part of your question, in order to be competitive, you need to be very good at the end-to-end process of designing, prototyping, setting up a supply chain, commissioning suppliers, verifying suppliers through various processes, through to getting parts to be able to build the first prototypes, whether that be a car or a ship. Now, ships and trains are slightly different. In automotive, we prototype cars, use them for testing, and then scrap them. Whereas, a vessel or a ship is the first one is a customer order, or it's the only order in many cases. So we don't have the luxury of that, but the same principles apply. In manufacturing, we need to be very, very efficient in how we bring in our components and then how we de-skill, in some cases, our jobs to be able to assemble and recruit. As Tom said, there's a massive recruitment shortage. In some of the papers in maritime, they're saying, we need 30,000 extra employees and apprentices. And that's a huge order to try and find and upskill, that kind of volume of people in order to satisfy the demand. So we need to be very, very good at how we set our factories up, how we set our processes up, and then how we quality assure and get things out at the right cost, at the right time, and within time. And if you think about some of the big, submarines, I've got experience in building submarines, and I've got experience in commercial vessels as well as some naval vessels. The lead times are huge. The time to develop a submarine is years. The time to build a submarine is multiple years, 6 to 10 years in some cases, and even up to a year to 2 years to commission. So if we can reduce those times to, develop, build, commission, we can get more volume through, or build the next vessel, or build other vessels for not just the UK, as Tom said, for other countries and export. So long-winded answer, but addresses 2 points, hopefully.
Tom, I think you wanted to say something on this.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to that pipeline of orders bit. If the UK government pipeline of orders can be, drilled towards UK yards, there's that opportunity to get the experience to, for the investment, for the productivity, and let's say the process management as well. So, because these yards are assemblers, integrators of vessels, and that's an entire huge sort of project management process that you need to develop the experience with, and they have the practical knowledge of using. And if you do a single vessel, you learn all that in one go, and then you've got another no vessel second vessel to build, and it all goes somewhere else. You're continually starting again. So, I mean, that's been some of the success, for Babcock up in Rosyth, is you've got a 5-vessel order. So you see the first vessel takes a long time, second one shorter, third one, everybody sort of knows what they're doing. So that I'm telling you guys how manufacturing works. It's that's what's needed. That's what's the golden goose there.
So I mean, the other thing that strikes me that's needed is this: our yards have got to be the best in the world, because if you're going to, that's the only way to compete on the world stage. Now, I've got a great job because I go and visit factories in all sorts of industries all the time. I've seen what an old rail yard looks like for manufacturing and what the future rail factory looks like, and they're very different. And the efficiency levels that have now been raised, and it's not about robotic welding or whatever, it's about the process, the flow, the layout, and how they've done it. I've been around shipyards overseas and in the UK, and I see that shipyards measure themselves against other shipyards, and I personally think that's wrong, because they're not as efficient and good as other sectors. Tom, how do we get the maritime sector to look to other industries, look what rail's done to totally change? Because that was a historic industry like maritime that was making trains in the same way for decades and decades and decades, and has suddenly realized, hang on, we can't do that and compete on the world stage. How are we going to get maritime to wake up and go, actually, we need to compare ourselves against other industries?
It's always a challenge, isn't it? It's the headspace for an organization to actually think that there could be another way of doing something. So I don't think it's just shipyards. I think it's any manufacturing business could, the brilliant ones do have the ability to take that helicopter view and just step back and have a second think. So again, nobody's going to do anything. Nobody's going to employ more people or spend lots of money if there's not a nice pipeline of orders to actually work on it. So a broken record coming back to my government pipeline of work, but it is that kind of opportunity to invest in the people, the skills, the productivity, and look at other sectors, have that time to think about other ways of doing things. So perhaps they should all come to one of your great workshops, Darren.
Absolutely. Steve, you've done, I'm going to come back to rail again, because I know you've worked with lots of rail manufacturers and maintenance companies, but you've been involved in not just designing, but then project managing the newest rail factory in the UK. And it's kind of the future rail factory of how to do it. How did that sort of work in terms of getting a rail manufacturer to realise, actually, we need to tear up 200 years of history and do it differently?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Really traditional industry, very unionised still, dependent on government orders. So yes, very traditional in all senses. But again, they will lose the work to overseas countries such as Eastern Europe and others if they don't become competitive. So fortunately, they are, the outfit we're working with is manufacturer and a maintainer of rail components, so things like bogies, wheels, power systems, etc. And they've got a forward-thinking board who say, look, we won't survive in the UK unless we change the model. It will just go out to other countries. So they've embarked on a design piece. They embarked on looking at different industries, aerospace, automotive. They embarked on looking at competitors to see how they were maintaining or managing or refitting and refurbing components overseas, and then set about the brave decision of, could we design a factory that did all this in one place? Could we design a factory that's far more modern, with more modern equipment, more modern processes, tooling? Could we eliminate some of the hazards and safety issues of lifting big components, carrying them end to end down the factory on great overhead cranes, improve the safety for their employees? And then could they modernise the skills within the factory to, go from single people only being able to do single jobs to single people being able to do multiple jobs? Because then, you're never going to get a perfect pipeline, to Tom's point, of one component or another. So you need people who can be flexible across the factory to be able to do electrical systems or mechanical systems. And that. So, complete revolution of the traditional way. A wheel shop would work, a bogie shop would work, an electrical system shop would work, very siloed. And, you started there and you finished there 40 years later. So, again, lots of parallels to maritime.
Now, I want to just focus in on something you said about the people having that flexibility and they can do multiple tasks. Is that a change of people, or is that a change of process, or is it both? How does that work? Because this is sort of proper lean stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, so in lean, we ultimately want a versatile and agile workforce, because, whether it's private sector, government funded, demand is never steady. Demand goes up and down depending on, economic events. Demand goes up and down depending on where you are in the life cycle of your product. So you want a versatile workforce to be able to speed up and slow down the output. I mean, automotive, I'm ex-Toyota, we spent years trying to get throughput and capacity through our factory and benchmarking against other businesses and sectors, because throughput was everything to us, because the faster we could get a car assembled from start to finish and out the door meant we got paid. And we in the volumes we were doing, 400-600 cars a shift, 9 million cars globally a year, you needed velocity and throughput. Well, the way to do that is to move components off of the line to make the line shorter. So things like IP assemblies, making them sub-assemblies, suspension systems, making them a sub-assembly, engine, making it a sub-assembly, and then bolting it into the car once it's sub-assembled. Because if you can take all that work away, one, you can build that in a slower pace, a bit more skilled, maybe an aging workforce. But two, you get the velocity down the main line. Well, I think, shipbuilding's been modular for a number of years, because you can build cabins, you can build engine systems and lift them in. So there are things that, we were learning in automotive, which is very fast-paced, that shipbuilding already does, but could do more of. But ultimately, it's about how do we multi-skill the workforce, so we need less people, ultimately, to build the vessel. Therefore, we can do it at a more competitive price.
And Tom, from your perspective, the last question, because we're running out of time. I've seen loads of figures bandied about skills in maritime. There's 135,000 shortage in one report, another says it's 50,000, whatever. Does that sort of approach that Steve's talked about and how Rail's dealing with that, does that sound practical and acceptable to maritime? Do you think it's too big an obstacle to get over, or do you think we could go in that direction?
No, I think the new build side, there are, particular skills that are commonly talked about, your pipe fitters, your welders, and that's the submarine side of things that, particularly high level, and aluminium's a sort of speciality as well. So, those are the common pieces, but then increasingly the sort of the electrical skills, the power management skills, those pieces are the ones that are, as vessels go that way. Type 26 is particularly with the GE. Those are the sort of the newer skills that are needed, and if you layer on those sort of new like digital skills, the new fuels that are coming in, where are all the hydrogen engineers who can have hydrogen vessels? Where are they, for example? So, there's a sort of a traditional, welder, pipe fitter, yes, but with a whole level of new skills needed as well that are coming down the line, and the increasing targets for being cleaner and greener is only going to drive up those opportunities. The great jobs, fantastic jobs. If you look at, last point, if you look at something like the Sedaybed Attenborough, the Camel Air built, that vessel it's got thousands of kilometers of network cabling on. You I don't know about you or me, I'm plugging together my own computer here at home with all the different wires. I mean, that's a bit of a miracle when it works, but you thousands of kilometers with endless amounts of sensors and sonars and scanners and all that stuff, and getting all those systems embedded and work. I mean, that's an amazing piece of technology floating around the world there, doing our ocean research. So.
Thanks for that, Tom. Last question to you, Steve. Do you think you talked about automotive and getting 500 cars through a day or whatever, a shift? Shipbuilding's not like that. It's low volume. Can the same lean methodologies, can it really work in low volume manufacturing?
100%. But people get lean very wrong and misguided. Lean is a methodology. It's a set of principles. It's a way of working. There are thousands of tools that underpin that methodology. Some that only work in automotive, but some that can be transferred. The best way is the application. So if we take the principle of just in time as one thing, or quality, we can apply that to, one-off shipbuilding. We can apply that to 500 cars a day, because what we're trying to do is embed quality, embed safety, embed productivity and efficiency. But the application of how we do it in a one-off versus 500 cars a day may be very different. But the principle of what we're trying to do is the same, is build things in a simpler way to make them more effective, to make them more efficient, to make the workforce more productive, to get a higher quality and higher safety output. That applies to anything from the NHS through to service industry, through to all manufacturing, regardless of volume.
Thanks for that, Steve. Sadly, we've run out of time. I really would just like to thank you both. That's been really fascinating. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you to you, the listeners. Thank you for joining this Maritime Forecast. This podcast, again, was brought to you by Develop Consulting in conjunction with the fantastic SMI. Up on the screen, I think we're going to have popped up a QR code. So if you're watching this, you can have a look and find out more about SMI. If you're in Maritime and you're in Britain, you should be a member. If you're listening to this, you can find SMI at maritimeindustries.org. Develop Consulting are there to help anybody in the maritime industry. Real specialists. They work with household names. Some of the biggest companies in the world call on Develop Consulting when they really want to go for genuine world-class operational excellence, and that's across rail, aerospace, and of course maritime. You've been a great audience. If you follow this podcast, give it a nice like, but also if you'd like us to discuss other topics, if you'd like to come on it and speak to us, please get in touch, because this is going to be a series that's going to continue. It's for your benefit to listen and learn, but also to engage with us. Hope you've enjoyed this first one. I hope you listen to the subsequent ones. I've been Darren Jones, your host. You can get hold of me at darren.jones@develop-consulting.co.uk with your fine comments telling us how wonderful it was. And again, if you're an SMI member, do click on there and engage. This has been the Maritime Forecast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.